Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Swift Shift Effective Strategies for O11 to ODC Transition. Thank you for joining us. Tonight we have Leonardo Fernandes, Stuart Harris, Joao Melo, and Raphael Ranieri talking about the subject. And I am your host, Patricia. I work at PhoenixDX, one of the OutSystems partners, and I'm very happy to welcome everyone here tonight. So we have first planning and ODC migration with Leo, then migrating forged components with Stuart, strategies for a successful coexistence of O11 and ODC with Joao Melo, and key factors to evade immediately when conducting a health check with Raphael Ranieri. And I invite you, Leo, to share your screen and present your part.
So my name is Leonardo Fernandes. Probably heard one way or another about me. I'm the head of experts for PhoenixDX in Australia, based in Brisbane. I'm also one of the OutSystems MVPs. I'm going to talk about, so there's this point in time that we're living in that we will be soon, everyone will be migrating to ODC. How are we going to accomplish that? So first, I guess we need to realize that shifting to ODC is kind of like embracing microservices architecture. So there is people that have already done it in other technologies, and now it's time for us in OutSystems to do this leap into this new architecture in the industry. So of course, this brings some challenges. We're moving from a monolith to a microservices. That means we'll need to split our application into services and orchestrate them together. But what we gain is a more flexible deployment of these microservices, more scalable application in runtime, and of course using modern frameworks to leverage, such as AWS Lambda and containers. So this is the proposed approach. There's 4 milestones. Looks pretty simple. The first one and the second one is what I'm going to focus on today. The remaining talks are going to touch on points 3 and 4, so I'm not going to steal any of that. Stuart and Joao are going to talk about points 3 and 4. Rafa will probably do a mix of them. Anyway, the first thing that you should do is assess your portfolio. So given your applications that you have currently on, either have an automated tool that OutSystems is working on that will do some of this for you, get a report to see the state of your architecture, or just use Discovery to find out how your architecture is at the moment, and if it's ready to migrate to ODC. There's also some companies, Phoenix included, that will be providing services to help you do that assessment and give you such a report of what are the changes in terms of architecture that you need to do to be ready to migrate to ODC. So that's like a preparation step for you to be aware of the steps that will come. The second step then is putting your hands in, doing the changes in your code, in your applications in Service Studio. So these steps in some more detail are 7 of them. I'm not going to go through all of them in too much detail because of time constraints. But the 7 steps are described in the documentation if you look for them. The first step is kind of continuing this assessment, organizing your architecture into the architecture canvas, organizing them in layers. And this will help you already split some concepts from your architecture, isolate and see which modules are going to, I guess, be condensed when you migrate to ODC. So for example, we will have 3 different layers, which is pretty standard in OutSystems, and you can already identify at this stage, based on your application, your architecture, you can identify the top layer with the UIs that will become the applications in ODC, and maybe the service layers, and maybe the libraries. So this will later on map to ODC concepts. Second step, isolate them further in domains. So domain-driven design or domain-driven architecture is a pretty big topic. But basically, what you end up with is domains, different domains, which you can think as kind of isolated contexts that can live in isolation. So for example, I can imagine having an order application without having any of these other domains. And vice versa, the banking can also exist without the order application. So they exist on their own, they serve different business units, and they don't need to be strongly coupled. They can be weakly decoupled, which you don't need to do right now, but we'll do later. And this is just preparation for that decoupling. Next step after doing that architectural work, there is going to be a tool. It's currently under development, but a tool that will check your application architecture and see if it's ready to migrate to ODC, or if you need to fix a few other things in terms of architecture before you move on to the next step. The fourth step is separating your domains into application, service, and library. And at the end, you end up with vertical layers of your applications, each not vertical layers, but vertical clusters of applications. Each vertical represents a business unit, serves a particular purpose, and the vertical units can interact between them using a service layer, for example. And this would be definitely, we're all already looking at a domain-driven architecture at this point. All of this, by the way, if it's not clear, all of this will be done in O11, just preparation for the migration to ODC. Fifth step is going to be fun, at least I think it will be fun. Kind of like the service action kind of won the race of most useful tool, at least in the industry. This, of course, represents the weekly coupling of applications and being able to deploy one microservice without affecting other microservices. So what you'll need to do in this step is basically use this a lot in your architecture to decouple applications between themselves. And basically what it means is replacing server actions with service actions. In most scenarios, it will be a simple find and replace. Step number 6 is looking at some features that have changed in design on ODC. So for example, extensions, which is the ability to write C# code. It exists in ODC, but it has changed dramatically. And because of containerization, the extensions work very differently in ODC. Access to database entities because of weakly coupling between applications. And this domain isolation, you're not allowed to access entities from other applications in some circumstances. So ODC has more enforcement in terms of architecture and introduces some other constraints that will force you to rethink or maybe refactor some of these features that you're using in your application. Again, there is extensive documentation about each of these topics and what you need to do to evaluate your application and do this refactoring to arrive at an ODC compatible application. Seventh step is related to some features that don't exist at all in ODC. It's still unclear when these will be supported and in what, I guess, in what compatibility level they will be supported. So your option for now is rethink these features, how they are used in your application. Currently, at least I could think of, is PPT and SOAP. Not extremely widely used, but if you are using any of these features, you might need to change your application to avoid these features in the first place before you start your migration to ODC. And that's the last step. After this, I think the next presenters will show the steps after this preparation. That's it from me. I guess, Stuart.
So I'm going to be talking about migrating Forge components to ODC. I'm Stuart Harris. I'm a software development lead at Kiandra and one of the OutSystems champions. And as you can see, I went on a client visit today, so I'm wearing a nice shirt, pretending I'm a respectable person. So, all right, so we're going to go through why do we migrate at all? I think it's kind of obvious, but and checking the ODC Forge for similar components. They might already be there. If they're not, determine the type of component that we've got to migrate, and then deciding on a migration strategy. All makes sense. Okay, end of presentation. Actually, we'll keep on going. Right, so why are we going to migrate? Well, if you only take anything, as Leonardo's really just pointed out, there are architectural constraints in ODC because of the change in the architecture model. So some examples of those are libraries can't actually have data. Well, libraries can have static entities, but they can't really have data or expose REST APIs. External logic uses a HTTP call and because of that, can't pass an object, which is kind of a reference to a C# object in or out of the extension. ODC Forge components, they're kind of modules, not containers of multiple modules. So whereas you used to be able to publish like an application to the Forge, now you're just publishing, well, you can still publish an application, but it's a library or an extension is a separate publish to the Forge. And extensions in OutSystems 11 and now external logic and connection. So they're two separate things in ODC. So that's why we have to migrate. So if you had a look at the Forge and you click on OutSystems Developer Cloud, then you'll find that there's a whole lot of stuff already there. There's been a whole lot of work done to migrate a lot of the existing Forge components. So if you do find the one that you're looking for or a similar one that you could use, be sure to just check the interface because of architectural changes, they will work a little bit differently. A great example is Excel library, in that what's happening now in the Excel library and in a bunch of other components is instead of getting an object reference back to your Excel object, now you're passing the whole Excel binary in and out. And at first you'll probably say, oh no, that's going to perform badly. Well, those things will, except that the change in the interface is we're making changes to cells and writing into cells. There's an action there now that has a list of changes. So you can do 1,000 changes in one go, for example. And that actually performs well. So have a look at the interface, see how it's different, and learn how to use the new interface. Okay, So check the forge. Now, if it's not there, we want to think about what features of OutSystems we're using in our component. So those sort of things might be client actions, a plain UI block, maybe it uses some JavaScript, server actions with no data storage, or a consumed REST API, and all the rest of those things. Things to pay attention to are a server action that actually uses data storage, exposing a REST API, an extension that actually passes an object in and out. Leonardo mentioned about SOAP APIs. So if you're using a SOAP API, we'll need to migrate that. Or maybe you've got a combination of those things. Okay, so let's say, well, the first migration strategy is awesome, and it's the easiest way to migrate. Aside from the fact, and now I haven't mentioned in any of this, that OutSystems have developed a migration tool. Now, I think that's in beta, and I don't think it's publicly available, but it may be at some time soon. Without that, though, if you have, all your Forge component has is client actions, or maybe a plain UI block, even if it's got JavaScript, server actions, but no data storage, or you're consuming a REST API, you're fine. You can actually cut and paste that from Service Studio into ODC Studio. So that's kind of easy. So, and then you're done. So really not much of a migration there, which is brilliant. You can't export out your module though and just import it into ODC. You have to cut and paste because there's differences in the format, I presume, because it doesn't work. So, right, so that's number one, easiest way, cut and paste. So all of the next changes mean some sort of redesign. So now if you have a server action with data storage, or you expose an API, you can't really expose that as just a library in ODC, because you remember libraries can't have data storage or expose an API because they get merged into the container. So they get merged into the application. So what you'll need to do is convert those server actions into service actions. And then in terms of exposing an API, in converting those server actions to service actions, you need to actually create a completely separate application in ODC. So, and then the other code referencing your component will reference it using service actions. And then you can use data storage inside your application. It's not a problem. And you can also expose that API. Why did I say evaluate? Oh, so the issue with service actions compared to server actions is they're slower. So evaluate the design for the service actions that you're using. Not only are they slower, they encapsulate a transaction. So let's say, for example, previously you had 3 different server action calls in a row. The change that you will need to make to your API is really merge them into one. So you can leave those actions as they are in the component, except expose them as one service action, because you don't really want to be calling multiple service actions in a row. If the second or third one fails, you'll need to roll back the changes in the first one, and you don't really want to be going there if you can avoid it. Okay, so redesign if you're using data storage. Okay, external logic. So the way you build extensions or external logic in ODC has changed a little. So really all you need to do is open the extension in OutSystems 11, Extension Studio. create a new external logic component in ODC. Use the templates. There's two, actually, no, I think there's 3 really good templates. So choose the appropriate one. And then just define the interface in ODC, and then copy and adapt the contents of your extension methods. And then just follow the normal instructions for ODC external logic and publish it. So you do have to migrate the external logic, but it's pretty straightforward. Right, now, here's the bad one. So if you're using extensions that pass or return an object, you're going to have to rethink your design because the extensions just can't do that. So have a look at Excel library as an example. That's a great example of the right way to do it. If you're using a SOAP API, consider if you still need to use that SOAP API, you don't have another choice, you could actually create an extension that calls that SOAP API. But remember, that's going to be 2 hops now. It'll be one HTTP request to the extension and then another to the SOAP API and back. Okay, so it's a little bit of bad luck with respect to the object in the extension. It means that some things aren't really possible. For example, you'd probably use the human, the human readable auditing component. That relies on passing an object back and forward. So your auditing is going to actually be a little bit more work for the moment. If something else doesn't come along, that's what it's going to be. All right, moving on. And well, look, if you've got a combination of all of the above, you really just need to use a combination of those strategies. It's kind of lowest common denominator. If you've got the worst one where you have to rethink it, well, you'll have to rethink that component, but maybe you can actually wrap the rest of it into an application or even just create a library for the rest of your component. You may have to split your Forge component up. All right.
Look, just a feedback on your presentation, mate. This is the best wrap-up slide I've ever seen.
Thanks. I'll take that feedback.
Nice to meet you all. Good evening for the ones based in Australia. My name is Joao Melo. I'm an OutSystems MVP as well, and I work for PhoenixDX and Hubway Connect in Australia as the head of products. And I'm going to talk about strategies to implement a successful coexistence between OutSystems 11 and ODC. You're going to see me looking at the side here a few times, but just organization screens. All right, so what is coexistence? What does it really mean? I believe whoever worked on delivery projects and went all the way to, especially when you're replacing legacy systems, most times you don't want to have a big bang approach where you have the new application ready and then over the weekend or after a funny night, you deploy the new application, and on the other day, all the users are transitioned to the new app, right, out of the blue. I mean, ideally, it would be perfect, but OutSystems is going through the very same transformation experience now. They're coming up with a new product to market, ODC. They need to dephase the old product, O11. I mean, don't take me wrong. I don't think it's old yet. I still have a personal attachment to 11, and I think it's going to last for a few years. But eventually, it's going to be replaced. But there's a journey to get there, right? ODC was announced a few years ago, and O11 is still going to be around at least until 2027. Whoever's feeling like betting on that year, feel free to come and talk to me. But anyway, the date is 2027. O11 is still going to be around, and ODC is kind of growing. So we look at ODC as the new kid on the block, getting all the new cool stuff being added to it, whereas O11 is not going to get some of the new cool features. Expectations that ODC is going to increase adoption over time or usage. and O11 is going to be less used. So that's all expectations. That's what the plan looks like. And just as platforms are going to coexist, so will apps, right? So if we consider that applications have been built in O11 and have been in use for years, there's customers with really complex app portfolios running in production. It's not going to be a shift swift. It's not going to be that easy. So there needs to be some strategic thinking in order to have applications built on both platforms coexisting or living and talking to each other. But let's discuss what coexistence really is. I brought some generic concept from directly from Wikipedia. Unfortunately, the author was not directly linked to the statement, but I found the statement clarifying. Coexistence is the property of things existing at the same time and in a proximity close enough to affect each other. So the definition is really good. When it comes to apps coexisting, they need to talk to each other, sometimes both ways, and they affect each other. I would translate that to in our world in IT, in software engineering, to the ability of two or more platforms or apps to integrate data and share artifacts, code components, as Stuart just shared, while specializing in their own domain. So I think there's a specialization concept here, and for the ones who have researched already on the concepts and on the migration and transition content that has been made publicly available over the last year by OutSystems, there is a huge topic on the strategy to go about porting applications into ODC. We're going to discuss about a few of these steps here. So when it comes to coexistence, that's pretty much what we're talking about. Just to put a picture in our minds, talking about O11 mission critical applications with complex business rules built over the years, sometimes over decades, running steady in production. I think some of us here, the gray hair ones at least, heard of applications built in OutSystems 4, 5, or 6 that are still running live in production. Some of them were upgraded over time, but they're still running steady. So most business are going to have a hard time to implement a full-on migration of all these legacy applications in one shot. That's what a coexistence can be used for. And we're talking about building new apps using the ODC platform. That's the recommended approach. Today, we're here to discuss pros and cons. Leo and Stuart shared a bit of them, and Raph is going to suggest some good best practices and things to avoid. But new applications would be built in ODC moving forward, but consider that in customers with a complex portfolio already, the new apps will need artifacts, so pre-built functionalities, and also data. So they will need to integrate with OutSystems with O11 data in order to be specialized in their own domain, right? I'm going to be more focused on the data aspect of it, and just a little bit of why. Why are we talking about coexistence, and why should we not invest as a business in one-shot big bang approach? First, we want to make sure we address business continuity. There's no such a thing as migrating in one shot a complex portfolio built over years or decades. There's a tremendous investment involved. So we want to protect the investment in the legacy systems. And we want to reduce risks as well. We all know that development is just one part of the whole solution delivery area. Developing a solution, you're just starting with it, right? So there's a lot of aspects in terms of change management, training, supporting users. When you're rebuilding an application, the experience is never going to be the same because apps built years ago are not going to have the same experience as modern solutions built currently. So these are all the three pillars, the three reasons why coexistence come in handy, especially in complex scenarios. So in terms of coexistence, the key recommendation is to think of a phased approach. What do I mean by phased approach? It has to do with migrating applications that are more suitable to the features already available in ODC. So consider that you have a portfolio with 10, 12, 20 applications running live. Not all of them are going to be ready to migrate, but some of them will. So that's just one criteria for prioritization that can be used. And then we're recommending a step-by-step or a chain of events, a chain of a sequence of events in order to enable an IT team, an OutSystems development team, to be able to port applications to ODC. So start using ODC for new apps. That's hands down, considering the pros and cons, considering the restrictions and the features already available at the time. And leverage the pre-built components. So as Stuart just shared, Forge is already getting some shape. There's some significant amount of new components already available in the ODC Forge. Progressive migration, that's pretty much what I was referring to just now. Progressively migrate O11 apps that will benefit from the ODC capabilities. As I said, if you have a portfolio, map the applications that will tick all the boxes in the available ODC functionalities and start with them. Data integration, tackle the data integration challenge. When you're migrating apps into ODC or when you're building new apps in ODC, you might not want to migrate data. You might want to consume data sitting in legacy applications. So think of your data interoperability aspects. Think of the approach you're going to put together in terms of protecting data currently available and while making it available for new apps. And then scale up. So once you have solidified your ODC adoption strategy, start migrating the remainder of the applications. ODC has and will keep having a very active roadmap. It is going to have new functionalities added, especially over the next few years, because OutSystems is focused on having it as a production-ready platform. And these new functionalities are going to be added consistently over the next few years. So what we see now in the current features currently supported by ODC is going to change very soon. So the idea is that you bring remaining applications in the O11 portfolio and migrate them across to ODC as new features are made available. In terms of data integration, the recommended approach is to look into strategies to implement APIs, to have the O11 data available for ODC consumption. APIs, it's no secret, so I'm not going to delve deep into how to build APIs. That's not the purpose. But the idea is to have O11 exposing data through APIs into ODC and vice versa. So O11 will also have the ability to consume ODC data through APIs. And that's pretty much what I'm proposing when it comes to coexistence and keeping the data underneath their own domain solutions. There's a few heads up though, some heads up though. Coexistence is suitable for large app portfolios. Of course, you don't want to have two simple apps, or potentially you might not even have come to production. And these simple apps absolutely can migrate in a one-shot approach. So we're talking about large app portfolios of significant money investment, time and effort investment. The phased approach is more suitable for these cases. Data integration is different from data migration. We're discussing about keeping data sitting on their own domain solutions. So if in your O11 portfolio, it makes sense to keep the data sitting on the legacy application, go with the data integration or interoperability approach. If you're planning to decommission old O11 applications, you need to plan to migrate the data. So having the data moved from the old database into the new ODC database. And adopt best practices. Not going to delve deep into it because I'm pretty sure Rafa is going to touch this in more details. But I see the coexistence between O11 and ODC as a good opportunity to reshape how we go about service-oriented architecture. Not only ODC supports layered canvas with some differences, of course, compared to the ODC standards and concepts, but it also supports when you add interoperability and integration capabilities between platforms and applications, you are naturally transitioning into a service-oriented architecture. So I see that as an opportunity to modernize an applications portfolio, to have less coupled applications, have a better service distribution and design thinking. So I don't have a cool wrap-up slide as Stuart. This was my last. I hope you guys appreciated the information. Happy to discuss offline, and happy to hand it over to you, Rafa.
Thank you very much, Joao. I see we have some questions already, but I will leave them to the end, okay, just to let everyone know. First of all, nice to meet you, everyone. I am Raphael Ranieri. For those who doesn't know me, I am a tech lead and OutSystems MVP at PhoenixDX. Today, I will be talking about some key factors to evade immediately when conducting a health check, especially when preparing your O11 applications to ODC. Okay, so what to avoid when preparing your O11 applications to ODC. Okay, so starting from the beginning, by the way, I want to highlight here that I will just talk about some of the best practices. There are a lot of them, but due to time, I will focus on 6. But starting from the beginning, this is a subject that Leo already talked about as well, which is basically to avoid monolithic apps on O11, right? So Stuart also talked about that, right? You might have heard that now we don't have modules anymore. When we had, or actually where we had applications with a lot of modules on O11, we will not have them anymore on ODC, right? So ODC will be just one app and that's it. So when you hear about that, you might have the idea that since I will need to have just one app on ODC, shouldn't I start doing just one app on O11 as well? If you had this idea, stop right now. This is not the recommended approach, actually. It can even make more difficult for you to migrate, right, your applications from O11 to ODC. So first of all, keep using the architecture canvas, right? Keep changing, or better yet, keep organizing your apps in 3 canvas, the end user, core, and library layers. OutSystems will provide those migration toolkits that we have been talking about to merge different modules in just one app for ODC. So don't worry about that. Keep using the architecture canvas. Okay, so this is the first and very important point. The second point, which is something Leonardo already talked about as well, is to avoid tightly coupled architectures, right? So in ODC, basically, all the containers will interact with each other through REST APIs, right? Through service actions. So if you can make your O11 applications already using service actions, or in other words, already be domain driven, right? If you can make all your applications in O11 to have specific domains, that means that when you migrate to ODC, things will be much easier, right? Because you are getting a domain from O11 and creating just one app on ODC. So the idea here is to avoid monolithic applications. Sorry, you can see that New doesn't like it. We have the X on the eyes. And in comparison, when we have microservices, New loves it. So keep in mind that if you can start using domain-driven architecture in O11, that will be a huge help for you on the future, okay? So this is the second tip. The third one, which is something everyone already talked about as well, is to avoid SOAP integrations, okay? So it's not that it will not be a workaround, or it's not that you will not be able to use them, the SOAP integrations on ODC, but it will not be as simple as we do with O11. So to consume SOAP APIs, for instance, you will need to create an extension, right? You will not be able to simply go there to the integrations tab, right-click, consume SOAP API. That will not exist on O11. We will need to create a C# extension in this case. And if you want to expose a SOAP API, that's even worse, right? It's not even on the roadmap for now. So exposing SOAP APIs, if it's something you need, you should start looking for a workaround immediately, right? Such as considering to use different protocols like REST. And between us, you can see here that the REST symbol is even better, right? I prefer a pillow than a SOAP. So REST is always better in terms of streamline processes. Okay, so this is the third point. Going to the fourth one, which is also very interesting, and I think it will be very fun as well, which is that now our stack in ODC will be, and when I say stack, I mean DB stack, right? Our database stack will be a little bit different, right? So on O11, you could choose if you wanted to use SQL, Oracle, DB2 as well. And now on ODC, we don't have an option, right? We need to use AWS Aurora. This is transparent for the user even. You will not even know you are using it if you don't look for it, right? But behind the wood, we are actually using AWS service, AWS Aurora Postgres serverless. And it's a slightly different database, right? It is a relational database, but it's an object relational database actually. And inevitable, because it's different, it will also use a different syntax, right? So I'm not sure if you guys can see here on this image. I hope so. But there are some examples of how an O11 query on a SQL-based server, for instance, would look like on ODC, right? So the same where here we have on SQL using O11 would be a slightly different, for example, when doing the query, right? Here you can see that we have those dots, 2 dots, and then time. So these are just examples of the differences we will need to keep an eye on, but it's very important to start already at least identifying all the SQL queries, that the advanced SQL queries you use on O11, so you can react fast on ODC. Because if you use, for instance, Oracle, things will be even worse, right? There are even a more disruptive change that you will need to take in consideration. Okay, so this is the fourth point. The fifth one, which is something Stuart already talked about in a little bit of details, is related to the extensions. So while we had on O11 our front ends and our C# codes on the Shift extensions were deployed to that front end, right? Running on the same scope as the rest of your applications. On ODC, we actually use AWS Lambdas for the C# integrations, right? So imagine that you have a container with your app, right? And you have a different container. In this case, it's not a container. In fact, it's more like a serverless function. But let's say it's a container just for the sake of the example. Okay, so imagine you have another container that runs your C# code, your extended code. This means that you need a REST API between them to integrate, right? Between your C# code and your container app. So when you have cases like the Excel library Stuart mentioned, that you use an object reference on your container, you can't do it anymore. You will need to send the binary, and things get even worse when you start talking about more complex scenarios, for instance, where you need to access the runtime database in an extension, right? This is not gonna be possible as well. What else? There are another example that I wanted to say. First is just remember. So first is the object references, right? We will not be able to do it easily anymore. Second is the environments variables. If you want to do something that is related to your environment. So for instance, some of you might know the extension we have, which is the factory configuration, right? On O11, we have the factory configuration extension where you can change properties from your front end, from your application, right? In this case, using an extension on ODC, that will not be possible because you don't have the scope of your container, right? You are on a different scope. You are in a serverless function. So things like that will not be possible anymore. With that in mind, the idea is to keep your extensions also in mind and keep a closer look on what you will need on ODC, and maybe rethink or re-architect your use cases and extensions going forward. Okay, so this is the 5th point. The last one, and the cherry on the top of the cake, I would say, the one I want to spend a little bit more time with everyone, is about your core widgets, especially, right? So special attention to your core widgets. To explain that, let's first start understanding that on ODC, we will have just 2 types of apps, right? So you will have applications, which is what you will deploy to your container, and you will have also libraries, which are not something that will be independently deployed to a container, right? It will be merged with an application if you use that, and it will be included in the container when the app is deployed as well. Okay, so we will have those 2 types of applications. The main difference between them is that for apps, for instance, you can have all kinds of different elements, right, including entities. So you have access to the database, for instance. You can see here on this image all the different elements that an app can have access to. However, the entities can only be exposed to different apps just as read-only, right? You can only read the data from different applications. And in case you want to update a record or you are changing the data, you will need to expose a service action for your other app to consume, right? So if you want to delete, create a record on a specific entity from app 1, in app 2, you will need to expose a service action from app 1 for app 2 to consume. Okay, so this is a very important point as well. because we will actually see why. Okay. And although apps can have web blocks as well, those web blocks cannot be exposed as a public element. So the same way we have on O11 core widget module, for instance, where we have a bunch of widgets that are reusable, defined as public, that can be consumed on any application. We can't have that on the apps currently on ODC, right? And that's why actually we have the libraries, right? So the libraries, in the other hand, is a different type of application that can only have some elements, such as static entities, structures, but can't have a database entity like we do on the applications, right? So the main difference between a library and an entity is that, the main difference between a library and an application is that on an application, you can't have public elements, but you can have entities. And on a library, you can have public elements, but you can't have entities, right? So one, you can have entities, but without public elements. The other one, you can have public elements without entities. It's important to say as well that a library can also only consume elements from other libraries or consume external REST APIs. So it can't consume, for example, a service action from another app, okay? Keeping that in mind, and moving to the next slide, you might have already noticed that a library will not be able to interact directly with the DB, right, with the entities from the applications, because the only way for us to have an entity or DB entity is using an application type, right, an app type of application. And when we are using a library, we don't have access to those entities, okay? Here on the right image, we can see as well how the different types of applications interacts between themselves. So you can see that an application can consume all these elements from a library. A library can consume all these other elements from another library, and an application can consume all these types of elements from a different application. However, a library can't consume an entity from the top layer, which are the application. What is the problem with that, actually? Imagine that currently you have on your O11 a bunch of core widgets, web blocks that actually access the database, right? So you have an isolated logic that when you click a button, it goes to the database and creates records, for instance, right? This will not be possible anymore on ODC, at least for now, right? To be able to get to, or to be able to implement that same use case, what we will need to do is either trigger an event from the web block to the parent application and handle this event, creating a record, for instance, or doing a database operation on the application that is consuming the web block. So this is the first option. The second option would be to consume a REST API. So you would need to expose a REST API from an application and consume it on your library. This approach could even create a cyclic dependency, sort of a cyclic dependency. So it's not very recommended, right? I wouldn't go for that option. And the third option in this case would be to duplicate your code, right? So instead of having the block on a library, you could move it to an application, but you wouldn't be able to reuse this web block on different applications, right? So with those three options on the table, if you ask me which one I prefer for myself or to use on my projects going forward, what I would recommend is to go with the first one, which is having the libraries just with the UI business logic, right? And whenever you need to create something on the DB or interact with the DB, you would trigger an event and handle this event on the applications that consumes the reusable weblogs. Okay, so this probably will be something that will impact a lot of people, because the way, at least I am used to see our customers using core widgets, is that they use core widgets to have core logic, right? So this is probably one of the biggest parts or the biggest challenge on the refactoring that we will have going forward. This is it, guys, that I wanted to share. Hope you like it, and now I think we can open for the questions.
Exactly. It's time to talk and guys complement each other's answer as well.
Yep, I have one question related to BPT, that it won't be supported in ODC. So what about the workflows if we have to implement? Are there some alternative in ODC for implementing workflows?
Happy to, sorry, Leo, go on.
Go.
Happy to share some information on that one. At the moment, there's no support for BPT on ODC, of course, as you guys know, but there is new functionality in the making to support workflows and business process management-based solutions. That's been in review. So some of the MVPs here have been conducting some product feedback sessions with the OutSystems engineering and product management team. I have been involved myself in sharing some information. I worked a lot with BPT before and other workflow-based solutions as well in different platforms. So that's in the making at the moment. OutSystems is developing this new ODC functionality. What I can say for now, and I promise that's the only thing I can share at the moment, it's not going to be exactly the same as BPT. In my humble personal opinion, it seems better in terms of developer experience compared to BPT. There's no clear path in terms of migrating previous BPT instances into the new functionality. But what I can say is that it's something planned for later in the year.
Can I add on that as well, Joao? Just
Yep.
one extra piece of information that I think we can share, which is that the BPTs on ODC will have an event-driven architecture, right? So it will be based on events. So it means that you'll be able to trigger BPTs the same way, or sort of the same way you do with events in the applications nowadays. Okay, so just to, I don't know, maybe create a little bit more of expectations. Maybe I shouldn't have said that, but yeah, it will be an event based. I know it is public information as well. So
this ODC, does it support multi-tenancy?
Not at the moment.
Not in the same way as O11, although it's possible to build applications that serve multiple tenants. You just need to be careful in your data model.
Okay, so we need to implement our own multi-tenancy concept, in other words. It doesn't support. Okay.
At the moment, yes.
At the moment.
At the moment, yes.
Juliana?
So then I think
Oh,
this might be one of the problem from migrating OS11 multi-tenant applications to ODC. Okay.
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah.
My question was about so there's probably going to be a lot of violations like best practices violations when we first tried to implement something due to the O11 bias. Is already AI Mentor ready to pick up on all of these, given it's supposed to, AI Mentor is supposed to learn from code in the repository?
That's a very
It
good
would be
question.
super respectful, both with it, Rafa.
Nobody wants
So
to answer.
I actually don't know the answer for this
Me
one,
neither.
because I think you are thinking a lot ahead of us, Julian. I think we are not there yet.
I want
But
to have some assistance.
Let me be brutally honest. I'm gonna steal the term you just used, the O11 bias, which is gonna create these difficulties to transition. I think it's a very smart term. I think that there's been a lot of discussion on the changes in terms of architecture. I mean, Rafa addressed a lot of them. Actually, Rafa wrote an article as well about a few of these differences. Really good article. There's been a lot of questions in the MVP groups in terms of how do we go about this, how do we go about that, and the ODC product team designed a new platform trying to get rid of the old biases, because we need to bear in mind that our O11 was designed almost 20 years ago, right? There's been new architectural patterns and concepts designed over the last 2 decades that need to be addressed. And in order to addressing those new technologies and patterns, there needs to be a full revamp in a few concepts and aspects. So architecture-wise, I think it's really important that whoever is wrapping their heads around ODC get clear understanding of the transitions, of the differences. And there's a number of articles already out there discussing the differences.
I can sort of add that like I'm not aware of kind of what's going on with AI Mentor, but my own experience is that the platform will just stop you. Like you just won't be able to do what you want to do if you design it like you would design an OutSystems 11 application. So I strongly second Joao's point that whoever's designing it really does need to get across it before they start designing, you know, the new application. Hope that helps.
But I think I agree with you, Stuart. The vision for ODC is to have all these checks incorporated in the portal. So no more standalone applications flying around different infrastructure components. When ODC was first released, they mentioned a concept called evergreen. Because do you guys remember that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was the vision for the ODC product. It's not yet implemented, but the idea is that IT admins and developers and tech leads are going to have this automated evergreen constant validation in a lot of different aspects, architecture, data consistency, and all those aspects. We didn't see that yet, but it's promising. It's interesting. So short answer is I think there will be something similar to AI Mentor in ODC. I think it's fair to assume there will be something similar to that.
Well, thanks.
Yes, thanks, guys. That was really informative. Really appreciate you sharing all this information with us. So I was just thinking, so with the current OutSystems 11, you've got the possibility to do IP protection. Is this on the roadmap? Would this be available in ODC?
I think that's by default the way ODC works. You cannot move code from one organization to another. So that feature already exists in ODC.
Okay, that's interesting. Can I ask another question as well? I probably know the answer, but just with regards to traditional web apps, what's the best approach to, you know, if we get to 2029 and you still have a whole suite of traditional web apps, you know, what's the best approach to get them into ODC?
Good question. I guess it would need you will need to migrate it to reactive. I don't see the traditional way of working with ODC because it doesn't scale the same way as ODC does. I think you're going to need to migrate it to reactive first. So I guess you would do 2 projects. One to migrate to reactive and then one to migrate to ODC.
Cool, thanks.
My question is about a licensing model, given the different infrastructure setup. Are we retaining the same licensing model based on AOs, or is there a plan to? I guess in the beginning they might be flexible with that, but what's the plan going forward?
I am not 100% sure about that, because right now there are a lot of conversations going on, okay, about the licensing, and I am not feeling like we have a final conclusion that I could share. But as far as I know, each platform will have their own licensing model, right? Or their own different license. You could try to negotiate, like talk with OutSystems and negotiate that to see if there are sort of a package that you could have, for instance, ODC for free while you migrate, but that is nothing official. Okay, it's something you would need to talk with them to see if it can be possible. But in terms of how much you will need to pay for ODC, if it's based on AOs, users, and everything else, that is something that is not completely defined, at least as far as I am aware. Okay, Juliano, I can follow up that for you and give the answer when I have.
Yeah, no, I guess it's understandable that this transition phase will be difficult. It will be very bespoke and depending on the clients and the relationship. I was really trying to guess what is the way going forward, but I think we have time until we get there. No worries, Rafa. Thanks.
Thank you for joining us.